All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel, and this is an educational channel focused on theories of everything, or cosmologies, or other all-encompassing theories that usually were put out by people person or people who never really got recognized, and their theories kind of are in jeopardy of being lost to history. And some of these go way, way back, and some of them don't go back so far. We are focused in on the reciprocal system of theory right now. This is a theory from Dewey B. Larson from the 20th century. He died back in 1990. Started working on his theory as early as 1930. A long, arduous period of induction followed until he arrived at his two fundamental postulates in the 1950s. And then he started writing books after that. First book came out, it's called The Case Against the Nuclear Atom. And then he put out his Structure of the Physical Universe, first edition, which he eventually updated in the 1980s, late 70s and 80s. We're looking at actually the first book of his update to the structure of the physical universe, called Nothing But Motion. Came out in 1979, and this book is mainly on physics. And the basic idea behind Larson's theory is that we live in a universe of motion. The universe is not made out of matter, and the universe is not made out of energy, but it is made out of motion, and motion is the relationship between space and time. That implies a generalized reciprocal relationship between space and time. They are the same. They are identical, except that they are reciprocals of each other in motion. They do not exist independently, only together in motion. Motion is a fraction, with time or space as the numerator and the other, space or time, as the denominator. And there are various regions of the universe where in some of them you have time over space relationships, and some of them you have space over time relationships. Space and time are both coordinate, meaning that they both have 3 or more dimensions, and they both come in discrete units, meaning that there is no minimum, there's no continuity. There is a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time. 1 unit of space and 1 unit of time is the speed of light, and the speed of light is the neutral point of the universe, or the background, or even the ether. The speed of light outward in all directions is what Larson calls the progression of the natural reference system. And that is also coming from the progression of time. There's also a progression of space. Time is always getting later and later. Space is always getting farther and farther apart. Observed empirically by the Hubble telescope, noticing that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. Okay, now we are in chapter 6 of this book, called Nothing But Motion, and this is on the reciprocal relation. And he's been putting out some pretty enlightening paragraphs here. We wrapped up last time talking about how there is really an inverse universe. There's a universe, you have one over 1. That is the speed of light. That is the background of the universe. In a universe of motion, you don't measure from 0. You measure from the speed of light outward in all directions. That's the neutral point. And then so that's 1 over 1. If you are on the space side of that, then all of your relationships are 1 over n, n being 1 or greater, greater than 1. If you're on the time side of that, then you're talking about n over 1. So you have 1 over n and n over 1, n being greater than 1. So, but an integer greater than 1. You don't have half units or third of units or 0.26 units or anything like that. You have, n can be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and in the space half, you have speeds that are less than the speed of light. That's where Einstein kind of made his mistake, where he's saying that the maximum speed of the universe is the speed of light. Well, he's really only referring to the space half of the universe. And in this time half of the universe, everything is moving faster than the speed of light. And you really have a relationship where you have the speed of light is the minimum speed of the universe. So those two different universes have different functions, but they both kind of algebraically balance each other out, 1 over n or n over 1. And so he's looking at this inverse relationship. We're going to take over just with the last 2 sentences here of that paragraph and then move on to the next part. The various physical entities and phenomena that involve motion of these several inverse types will be examined at appropriate points in the pages that follow. The essential point that needs to be recognized at this time, because of its relevance to the subject matter now under consideration, is the existence of inverse forms of all of the normal 1 over n motions and combinations of motions. So we are familiar with this 1 over n universe, this slower than the speed of light universe. But he's saying that there is an inverse form of all of that is identical to all of the forms that are in this 1 over n universe. There is an n over 1 universe where the absolute inverse entities exist. So where everything is an n over 1 relationship, and so we may know nothing about this universe, except that since we know everything about this other universe, we can extrapolate over to that universe and say, well, whatever is in this universe, it's identical twin, except that it is inverted. You reverse the relationships between space and time, is existing in this faster than the speed of light universe. Or he calls it a sector, calls it the cosmic sector, as opposed to the material sector. Okay, back to Larson. This is a far-reaching discovery of great significance. In fact, the new and more accurate picture of the physical universe that is derived from the motion concept differs from the previous ideas mainly by reason of the widening of our horizons that results from recognition of the inverse phenomena. Our direct physical contacts are limited to phenomena of the same type as those that enter into our own physical makeup, the direct phenomena, we may call them. Although the distinction between direct and inverse is merely a matter of the way in which we see them, not anything that is inherent in the phenomena themselves. In recent years, the development of powerful and sophisticated instruments has enabled us to penetrate areas that are far beyond the range of our unaided our unaided senses. And in these new areas, the relatively simple and understandable relations that govern events within our normal experience are no longer valid. Newton's laws of motion which are so dependable in everyday life, break down in application to motion at speeds approaching that of light. Events at the atomic level resist all attempts at explanations by means of established physical principles, and so on. The scientific reaction to this state of affairs has been to conclude that the relatively simple and straightforward physical laws that have been found to apply to events within our ordinary experience are not universally valid, but are merely approximations to some more complex relations of general applicability. The simplicity of Newton's laws of motion, for instance, is explained on the ground that some of the items of the more complicated general law are reduced to negligible values at low velocities, and may therefore be disregarded in application to the phenomena of everyday life. Development of the consequences of the postulates of the reciprocal system arrives at a totally different answer. We find that the inverse phenomena that necessarily exist in the universe of motion play no significant role in the events of our everyday experience. But as we extend our observations into the realms of the very large, the very small, and the very fast, we move into the range in which these inverse phenomena replace or modify those which we, from our particular position in the universe, regard as the direct phenomena. So he's basically just saying that, the legacy science basically used the general theory of relativity to explain all of the events that didn't fit into Newton's paradigm and Newton's simple explanations. Larson is saying you don't need to do that. You can just use this inverse phenomena, and you can come up with all those same answers, but it makes it way simpler. The universe is still simple. It doesn't require all of these ad hoc things that Einstein came up with, such as curved space, the Lorentz contractions. These are things that Einstein didn't even come up with himself. He just borrowed them from other people, but they are really, Larson is saying that they're basically like fudge factors just to get the right answers, but with no particular conceptual underpinnings. Okay, back to Larson. On this basis, the difficulties that have been experienced in attempting to use the established physical laws and relations of the world of ordinary experience in the far out regions are very simply explained. These laws and relations apply specifically to the world of immediate sense perception, phenomena of the direct space-time orientation, and they fail in application to any situation in which the events under consideration involve phenomena of the inverse type in any significant degree. They do not fail because they are wrong or because they are incomplete. They fail because they are misapplied. No law, physical or otherwise, can be expected to produce the correct results in an area to which it has no relevance. The inverse phenomena are governed by laws distinct from, although related to, those of the direct phenomena. And where those phenomena exist, they can be understood and successfully handled only by using the laws and relations of the inverse sector. See, this is a place where I think Larson would avoid a little bit of confusion if he were more consistent with his terminology. He's calling it the direct phenomena and the inverse phenomena, or the inverse sector. In his later work, especially in the book that we went over a little bit before this, called Beyond Space and Time, which is mainly on metaphysics, he uses the term material sector and cosmic sector. But here, in this earlier work, he's using the terms direct, direct phenomena, or he doesn't say direct sector, but he says direct phenomena and inverse phenomena. I think it would be more, he should choose one of the two. Either use direct and inverse or use material and cosmic. And, okay. Just this is just a really minor, I can't blame him for any of this. He's had to come up with this terminology himself, and it looks like he just kind of changed his mind at a certain point. But to move this theory forward, whoever is deciding this maybe should try to choose one of the two and stick with that same terminology. Okay. This explains the ability of the reciprocal system of theory to deal successfully with the recently discovered phenomena of the far out regions, which have been so resistant to previous theoretical treatment. It is now apparent that the unfamiliar and surprising aspects of these phenomena are not due to aspects of the normal physical relations that come into play only under extreme conditions, as previous theorists have assumed. They are due to the total or partial replacement of the phenomena of the direct type by the related but different phenomena of the inverse type. In order to obtain the correct answers to problems in these remote areas, the unfamiliar phenomena that are involved must be viewed in their true light, as the inverse of the phenomena of the directly observable region, not in the customary way as extensions of those direct phenomena into the regions under consideration. By identifying and utilizing this correct treatment, the reciprocal system is not only able to arrive at the right answers in the far out areas, but to accomplish this task without disturbing the previously established laws and principles that apply to the phenomena of the direct type. In order to keep the explanation of the basic elements of the theory as simple and understandable as possible, the previous discussion has been limited to what we have called the direct view of the universe, in which space is the more familiar of the two basic entities and plays the leading role. At this time, it is necessary to recognize that because of the general nature of the reciprocal relation between space and time, every statement that has been made with respect to space in the preceding chapters is equally applicable to time in the appropriate context. As we have seen in the case of space and time individually, however, the way in which the inverse phenomena manifests itself to our observation may be quite different from the way in which we see its direct counterpart. Locations in time cannot be represented in a spatial reference system, but with the same limitations that apply to the representation of spatial locations, they can be represented in a stationary, three-dimensional temporal, that is time, temporal reference system analogous to the three-dimensional spatial reference system that we call extension space. Since neither space nor time exist independently, every physical entity occupies both a space location and a time location. The location as a whole, the location in the physical universe, we may say, can therefore be completely defined only in terms of two reference systems. In the context of a stationary spatial reference system, the motion of an absolute location, a location in the natural reference system, as indicated by observation of an object without independent motion, such as a photon or a galaxy at the observational limit, is linearly outward. Similarly, the motion of an absolute location with respect to a stationary temporal reference system is linearly outward in time. Or later and later and later. Inasmuch as the gravitational motion of ordinary matter is effective in space only, the atoms and particles of this matter, which are stationary with respect to the spatial reference system, or moving only at low velocities, remain in the same absolute locations in time indefinitely, unless subjected to some external force. Now, remembering that those absolute locations follow the natural reference system, which is the progression of the natural reference system. So they stay in the same absolute locations in time, meaning now. So now is progressing. It's always getting later and later and later. And so these entities remain in the same absolute locations in time indefinitely unless subjected to some external force. Their motion in three-dimensional time is therefore linearly outward at unit speed, the speed of light, and the time location that we observe, the time registered on a clock, is not the location in any temporal reference system, but simply the stage of the progression. Since the progression of the natural reference system proceeds at unit speed, always and everywhere, clock time, if properly measured, is the same everywhere. As we will see later in the development, the current hypotheses, which require repudiation of the existence of absolute time and the concept of simultaneity of distant events, are erroneous products of reasoning from premises in which clock time is incorrectly identified as time in general. So you may want to listen to me repeat that paragraph a few different times. The whole chapter, really. The last 3 chapters. But especially this one, just to understand the reciprocal relationships. Okay, we will start up again tomorrow, recalling this last paragraph, and the next paragraph that he gets into is a way to visualize what he's talking about in the preceding paragraph. So we might back up just a little bit before we go forward. But this is difficult stuff, requires a little bit of abstract and visual thinking. But the basic gist of it is that, space and time have a reciprocal relationship. The relationships that we observe in space also obtain in time. But it's more difficult to see it that way because we're not seeing it directly but inversely. And he uses that same principle to propound really all of his different techniques for coming up with answers. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great day.